My name's Mondaire Jones, and I'm running for Congress.
He burst into the world of politics 2 years ago.
In the 244-year history of the United States, there's never been an openly gay black member of Congress. But
after winning one of the most packed congressional primaries in the nation.
that changes in 2020.
The crowded list included big names.
State Senator David Carlucci, Assemblyman David Buchwald,
big titles,
defense official in the Obama administration,
and big money.
Former federal prosecutor.
But in the end, it was a 33-year-old political newcomer from Rockland who won the bitterly fought Family Feud. Then, the November election.
Growing up, I never imagined that someone like me could run for United States Congress.
The Harvard Law School grad and former Westchester County attorney who grew up in Section 8 housing and survived on food stamps was an instant darling of the progressive movement.
I support a Green New Deal.
But his legislative priorities would soon get sidelined after a political earthquake shook New York.
A new and controversial congressional district.
With the old congressional maps tossed out this year and a powerful party leader running in his new district, Jones made the difficult decision this summer to run for a seat in Lower Manhattan, but struggled to stay ahead of the pack. Today, the exit interview.
Thanks for having me here.
His deepest regrets.
I'm devastated by what happened.
Proudest moments.
I have delivered time and time again for my constituents.
And yes, what's next for Mondaire Jones?
This is the first time I'm telling someone on the record.
A special edition of Power and Politics starts now. I'm Tara Rosenblum. Thanks for joining us. Come January, one of New York's leading progressive voices will be out of the job and Washington. We recently invited Mondaire Jones here to our Yonkers studio for a wide-ranging conversation where we discussed everything from January 6th and Donald Trump to whether or not a political comeback is in his near future.
I know this has got to be an emotional time with your time in Washington winding down towards its end, at least for now. What's your mindset like?
My mindset is celebratory. You know, there are a lot of folks you may recall in my first primary back in 2020 who said that because I had never held elected office that somehow I wouldn't be able to hit the ground running. Well, I've proved those people wrong. I have delivered time and time again for my constituents in Rockland and in Westchester.
Let's pivot to the big question that's on everyone's minds. What are you going to do when your time in Washington comes to a close?
You know, I got in this fight because I cared about addressing the big issues. And so when I got a chance to pass the Inflation Reduction Act, which is going to cap the cost of prescription drugs for seniors like my grandmother, that was a big victory. I want to keep doing stuff like that.
Do you have a job lined up as we're speaking right now?
I'm going to be appointed to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. I'm really excited about that. It's a 6-year term. It doesn't keep me from doing other things, including from running for office.
That's a big reveal. I haven't heard you announce this yet. Who appointed you? Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. This is the first time I'm telling someone on the record. The Speaker, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, gets an appointment to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. The job of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights is more important than ever before. The purpose is to investigate and report on the state of civil rights in this country, including civil rights violations. When we have a Republican Congress in the House next year, we're not going to be able to pass voting rights legislation. And so it's going to become even more important that agencies like the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights are able to amplify what is going on in this country.
Is this a full-time position?
It's a part-time role,
okay,
which allows me to do some other things. And I'm still having conversations about what those things are.
There are a lot of voters who would like to see you make a comeback to electoral politics and possibly even take on Assemblyman Mike Lawler, who is the congressman-elect for the 17th district. How closely are you considering making that run?
You know, I continue to hear from folks. Obviously, I didn't wake up one day and decide not to represent the community that I've loved my whole life and that raised me. And that got me this far, from Section 8 housing to Harvard Law School and then all the way to the United States Congress. I'm devastated by what happened. And it's also clear to me that I've got a job that I need to continue to finish. And so I am being very open-minded about 2024.
Do you think that you would have won that seat had you ran against Republican Michael Lawler?
There is no question that I would have won a district that I already represent 70% of, and whose constituents were already very proud of the job that I've been doing for them and took great pride in having me as their representative in Congress.
Take me back to the moment and the emotions that you felt when you learned that Sean Patrick Maloney would be running for that seat, which essentially left you displaced?
I was devastated. These are the kinds of things that you try to work out with folks before announcements like that, especially when you're from the same party. And more than that, because it's not just about Sean, it's about an utter failure across the board in New York State among elected leaders who got us to this place where a map was struck down by the New York Court of Appeals. I was quite pleased with the maps that had been drawn by the Independent Redistricting Commission. Even the maps that were drawn by the Republican commissioners on the Independent Redistricting Commission would have avoided a scenario where I was in a primary against Sean Patrick Maloney, the chair of the very powerful DCCC. And so this was completely avoidable.
But typically, once the primary process comes to a close, Democrats tend to coalesce around each other's campaigns, yet you did not endorse him after that primary. How come?
Oh my goodness. I was out stumping for all of our candidates, including Sean Maloney, when I knocked doors in Croton, for example. And so, I have made public statements saying that people should vote for Democrats up and down the ballot.
You also had the option of running in a district just south in the 16th against fellow Westchester Democrat Jamal Bowman. Do you regret not running for that seat?
I don't regret it. I've got a number of colleagues who really wanted me to do that. When I took a step back, I thought about the nature of the work that I've been doing. And I saw that on the issues around democracy and voting rights and the economy and racial justice, Jamal Bowman was more often co-sponsoring legislation that I had written than some other folks.
Jamal Bowman tends to caucus with the group of lawmakers known as the Squad, and yet you talked about the similarities, but you've taken a different approach on a lot of key issues than Congressman Bowman, specifically with foreign policy and Israel.
And infrastructure and so many other issues. Look, we've got very different districts, first of all. And then the other thing is just my own style of leadership is that of pragmatism and trying to always get results. And for me, that has led me in a different direction on some key questions. And I'm proud of that.
Instead, you took a big risk and you ran for the 10th Congressional District in Lower Manhattan, very far from your growing base. You did not have an easy go at it. Why do you think your campaign message at the end of the day didn't resonate more with the voters of Lower Manhattan?
What I would hear from people constantly is this: you have been one of the very best members of Congress, but you're not from this community, and we don't know you as well as we know other folks. And as frustrating as that was to hear, it's an understandable human reaction.
So then let me ask you this. If you could go back and do it all over again, what would you have done differently knowing what you know now?
If I had known that, this seat would go to someone who doesn't share my views on democracy, who isn't willing to call out Donald Trump for dining with anti-Semites, then of course I would have run for that seat.
Do you feel that the progressive groups across the state did enough to support you when you ultimately ran for the 10th?
No. That is demonstrably the case. But I continue to be encouraged by what I hear from everyday people on the ground who, sure, didn't live in New York 17th in Rockland and Westchester, but who have been following my work and know that I'm one of the very best members of Congress. And that gave me energy even when the leaders of certain organizations were more interested in Twitter likes.
So fast forward to November and the general election. Even though that anticipated red tsunami never arrived here to New York State, there were some key GOP victories, especially here in the Hudson Valley. Who do you blame that on?
I think candidates matter. Candidates matter a great deal. I have heard from hardcore Democratic voters, dozens of them, who have told me since the general election that they simply could not bring themselves to vote for the other Democratic nominee. because of their perception of how I was treated.
You have since joined the growing list of progressives who are calling for the ousting of the New York State Democratic Chairman Jay Jacobs. Why do you think new leadership is needed right now when overall, outside of the Hudson Valley and Long Island, the Democrats exceeded expectations this year?
Let me start by saying this. I think too much focus has been put on the chair of the New York State Democratic Party, Jay Jacobs, because these problems were cumulative. And they started with Andrew Cuomo, then the New York State Legislature, obviously the chair of the DCCC pushed a gerrymandered map. But having said that, Kathy Hochul should have been running a much stronger campaign. And when you look at her margin of victory over Lee Zeldin, who should never have come within striking distance in a statewide contest for governor, you have to look not just at the campaign she ran, but at what the party did or didn't do. I mean, it is well established now that the party has very little infrastructure and deployed very few resources in key parts of the state.
What would you say is the main thing that concerns you for the future of the New York State Democratic Party?
I worry about a Democratic Party in New York that is not invested in grassroots organizing year-round.
So overall, what would you say is the most valuable lesson you learned from the political roller coaster ride that was 2022 for you?
I think always making sure that when you make sacrifices, you're doing it for folks who are going to appreciate those sacrifices and that there are no collateral damages in the process of that.
Still to come, our conversation turns to presidential politics. We also ask Mondaire Jones to take us behind the curtain of his 2 years on the Hill. We'll be right back.
Congressman Mondaire Jones, thank you so much for sitting down with us as you now approach your final days as a representative serving the Hudson Valley in Washington, D.C. Has that reality sunk in for you yet?
Not entirely. I'm so used to doing the work in D.C. and being in the community, talking to folks. I've been doing that all weekend, for example. But it's going to be sad. I'm already sad. I've been sad, candidly, for the past several months. I mean, this is the worst feeling ever, right? It'd be something different if I hadn't been doing a great job, right? I see my colleagues who just coast to re-election, don't work nearly as hard as I do, just aren't delivering for their communities. And I'm the guy who had trouble. But I know that I'll be back soon.
I want to switch gears now and talk about national politics because you just spent weeks crisscrossing battleground states like Georgia and Ohio. I want your takeaways, starting with what is your biggest concern for the country right now?
Our democracy continues to be in crisis. We've got election deniers being amplified throughout the Republican Party. My colleagues could not find themselves to vote for the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. Reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act used to be uncontroversial. In 2006, it was reauthorized unanimously in the Senate. When does that ever happen? And almost unanimously in the House.
What results surprised you the most on election night?
I thought that Kari Lake was going to become governor in Arizona. And that was scary to contemplate. As you know, she would have been Donald Trump's vice president, and she would have taken on this outsized role in the party. And now she's been relegated to litigating her own baseless claims of election fraud.
Where are you most critical of the National Democratic Party?
I look at what happened to me. Could it not be more clear that this is a party that still does not value its young talent? It has a pipeline for younger people to grow and to take on roles so that they can lead in their communities.
With that said, do you think Joe Biden should run for re-election?
I've actually increasingly been confident that he should. And I say this because I don't know who else has done a better job in modern history as president. When you look at the things that he's accomplished with Democratic control of Congress these past 2 years, I think the midterms were a validation of the work that we've been doing. We defied the odds.
Should he decide not to run, the internet is already chock full of lists of potential contenders. Please use one word to describe the following names. Kamala Harris.
History making.
Amy Klobuchar,
Democracy champion.
Bernie Sanders,
Honest.
Pete Buttigieg,
Talented.
Gavin Newsom,
Fighter.
Gretchen Whitmer.
Impressive.
What are your thoughts on the election of Hakeem Jeffries to the leadership? Did you have a good working relationship with him when he was a legislator?
He has been an outstanding member of the Judiciary Committee where we served together. He is someone who I have asked for advice, especially in my first year in Congress.
What was the most valuable advice he gave you?
I think the importance of relationships in our caucus, which is something that too many of my colleagues still don't understand.
Let's learn a little bit more about your time in Washington, which of course got off to such a dramatic start. You were inside the Capitol building when the insurrection took place. Where were you? What was going through your mind?
I thought I was going to die. I had never felt like that before ever in my life.
I was on the House floor along with the rest of Democratic leadership. Very quickly, things became more dire, more sinister, because I was told that we would have to lock down the chamber of the House floor from the inside. And then shortly thereafter, there was a banging, and you heard the mob trying to get in. And the very few people who were there to protect us, withdrew their guns and started pointing them at the doors, and we had to take out our gas masks from beneath us. I can't believe this has gotten lost in everything for the past 2 years. But we didn't know that we'd be able to get out. Finally, through barricading what's called the Speaker's Hallway, we were able to sneak out through tunnels by going through that hallway in just the nick of time.
What was the memory from that experience that's the most seared in your mind?
I think it's what happened a few hours later. It was watching 2/3 of my House Republican colleagues still vote not to certify that free and fair presidential election, just hours after nearly dying alongside me on the floor of the House.
The January 6th committee has just decided to make criminal referrals. Should that list include Donald Trump?
Absolutely, it should.
I'm sure you caught his presidential campaign announcement last month down in Mar-a-Lago. I'm asking you now to pull out your crystal ball and tell me, who do you think the 2024 GOP nominee will be?
I hope I'm wrong about this, but I still think today it is more likely than not to be Donald Trump. I have no faith that Merrick Garland at the Department of Justice is going to move with the kind of speed required and that justice requires to indict this man.
What were your proudest moments as a congressman in Washington?
At a time when very few people thought this would happen, I negotiated an agreement. I brought progressives and moderates and conservative Democrats together, and we got the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act passed into law. And now many billions of dollars are coming to New York State.
Who do you most admire out of your congressional colleagues?
Jamie Raskin. Jamie Raskin has been a friend. He is an intellectual leader. He's a fighter. He's a bold thinker, and he's a good person.
What was the toughest vote you had to take?
I sometimes struggle with the vote on the NDAA, the National Defense and Authorization Act. What has happened, unfortunately, because of special interests in Washington, is that the NDAA becomes a holiday for lobbyists.
If you had the chance to pass any law that you wanted before your current congressional chapter comes to a close, what would it be?
It would be the Freedom to Vote, John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act.
What are you going to miss the most about being a congressman?
Being able to deliver for my constituents.
Still to come, the side of Mondaire Jones you haven't seen or heard before when the special edition of Power and Politics returns right after the break.
Now we're going to move to the lightning round. In a world full of influencers, who influences you the most?
My grandfather.
If you could change one thing about America, what would it be?
I want us to have a true multiracial democracy.
If you could personally witness one moment in U.S. history, what would it be? I didn't say it was easy.
Maybe the March on Washington.
What do you eat for breakfast?
I had a bagel with lox today.
What is your favorite local restaurant?
Oh my goodness, I've got so many. Lately, I've been eating at Craven Jamaican. I'm a Mamaroneck in White Plains.
What is the last book that you read?
We Were 8 Years in Power
What's the last thing that made you laugh?
Probably before this interview, Tara, talking with you.
Who is the person that you trust the most?
My mom.
What is your biggest pet peeve?
People who don't care
About the experiences of others.
What is something you've never done that you'd like to try to do at some point?
Skydiving.
And 'tis the season. What's the best holiday gift you ever received?
Getting elected by people in New York 17th District.
What is the worst holiday gift you've ever received?
I once got a movie that I already had.
Tell me a secret that you've never shared publicly before.
When I was in elementary school, I didn't always obey my teachers. I would talk back sometimes, which I still regret to this day. And as a result, you know, they wanted to sort of put me in special classes as a result of that. Until my mom and my father and people in the church community intervened.
And that wraps up our exit interview with Mondaire Jones. For more on our interview, head to news12.com. I'm Tara Rosenblum, and thanks for joining us for this special edition of Power and Politics.